Well, it's absolutely fabulous to be here today and to see the room jam-packed. And I believe that this is a crowd of the converted. That's what I would like to suggest. How many people here had the wonderful pleasure of biking into work today? And I'll put my hand up in the air because I did. And how many people here, you may not be in your hometown, on a regular basis have the wonderful pleasure of being able to bike into work? Throw your hands up in the air. So a lot more hands go up. It's a wonderful thing. Our medical officer of health talked about the health importance of active transportation. But we of course know that there's a quality of life reason why active transportation matters. And that when we plan a city in such a way as to make active transportation a real choice, that it is something that is a very easy choice indeed to make. So what I'm going to talk about in my opening comments here today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the link between how we plan our city and how people move about in our city. And over my work as a planner, working across this country for the past 15 years, often with Antonio on many projects, one of the things that became clearer and clearer to me everywhere I went, that movement mattered, and movement was intrinsically linked to how we plan our land uses, how we design our buildings, where we place our buildings, where we put our density, and that our movement is in many ways constrained by our planning. And we've, of course, just gone through this incredible era of planning sprawling communities, and that was really very much driven by a primary form of movement that was auto-based. And I'm going to talk a little bit in my presentation about how that is beginning to shift. In many ways, we have some of the most interesting pilot projects happening here in the City of Toronto, and they're happening as a result of the way we plan our land. So I've called this presentation The Big Shift and what it means for movement. And part of the big shift that's happening in the City of Toronto right now is that we are seeing a tremendous amount of growth in our downtown core, and we are seeing people choose to live in environments where they have a variety of choices in terms of how they move, whether that's walking, cycling, or taking transit, or taking cabs, or driving. But we see the most growth in the areas where we have the most choice with respect to movement. Now, interestingly, up until 2005, everyone knows we had some growth happening in the downtown, but we had very little employment growth in the downtown. It was mostly primarily residential. And there were big conversations about the reverse commuting that was going to be a big part of the future of the City of Toronto. People would live downtown, but they would have to commute out to business parks in Mississauga to go to work. Well, in fact, that has not held to be true. In fact, in building great places for people to live, we have in fact seen the employment follow. And it's not just following a little bit, it's following in a substantive way. There's approximately 9 large-scale office towers that are at some point or another on the books in the City of Toronto right now. So from 2006 to 2011, we have seen a 14.2% growth in employment in the downtown core. And you're probably all familiar with the stories of Coca-Cola moving from Leaside, moving into the downtown. Why did Coca-Cola want to move into the downtown? Because their employees want to walk to work and to take transit and to cycle. I sat last week at a dinner beside one of the senior executives at TD Bank. TD Bank has now consolidated all of its office space from around the GTA into the core of downtown Toronto. Why? Employee retention. Their employees want to live in a place where they can walk, cycle, and take transit to work. There's a fundamental link between how we plan our land and the choices that we provide for movement. Now, we also know that Toronto is, we're basking in the limelight a little bit right now, and we're basking because we are, in fact, the 4th largest city in North America. We surpassed Chicago, and in fact, we've seen exponential growth that has allowed us to surpass Chicago. Why are we seeing this growth? We're seeing this growth, I would argue, in part for, there's a myriad of factors, but quality of life is a key reason why businesses want to locate in our city, and it's a key reason why people choose to come and live in our city. Well, if we look at that very exciting number, about fourth largest city in North America. What's so interesting is that if we look at our growth, in fact, that growth is happening in the most urban part of the city, that area where you have the most choices with respect to how you can move around. So let's take a look at some of the numbers. We have 67,500 units approved or in progress right now in the City of Toronto. Where are those units in progress or approved? Well, 48% of them are in the downtown core, so that's south of Davenport. Now, if you take the downtown area, which is shown as the blue on the map, and you take the green area, which is the shoulder to the downtown, which takes us about up to Eglinton, we actually see that 81% of all of the growth in the city is happening in the areas, and I live within that shoulder area, and I'm very lucky because I was able to cycle to work today, and I frequently have that option. But all winter long, I take the TTC, and sometimes when I've got a lot of binders and books, I hop in my car and I hop down University Avenue. I have a whole series of choices in terms of how I can move about in the city. It's precisely in that area where we have the most choices that we in fact see the most growth. It's highly desirable to live in places that provide these kinds of options. Now let's look a little bit at our employment growth because it tells a little bit of a different story. You can see here all of the white areas represents our employment districts in the City of Toronto, and we're desperately trying to protect them. And the dots are where employment currently is across the city. So you can see that we have a tremendous amount of employment in our employment areas. And we do have employment spread throughout the city, but by far the vast majority of the employment is in the core of the downtown. It's important to know that our employment is increasing. It's up by 1.1%, or 14,000 jobs over 2011. And we are matching the national pace of growth for jobs, but we are outpacing Ontario in terms of the amount of growth that we see. What's important for you to know, and why I'm showing this to you, is that the areas that have the best transit access have seen the highest employment growth. There is a direct correlation. The urban structure of our city, as per our official plan, is all about directing our new growth to our transit corridors. And many of those transit corridors are in fact identified in our official plan as our avenues. And you can see them outlined on the map here. Many of these avenues have one-story buildings. They're relatively underdeveloped. We're in the process right now of bringing forward, there's a tremendous amount of development that's coming forward in a mid-rise form along these avenues that allows us the opportunity to take some of that good stuff, some of that great choice that exists throughout the downtown core, and to bring some of that choice, if you go back to this map and see the rest of the city, to spread out some of that choice to other parts of the city. And in fact, to disperse some of our growth to areas where we already have existing infrastructure. For example, I had the pleasure this weekend. Not only do I commute on bike, I also love to, I have a road bike and I ride with a group sometimes on the weekend. And we did a big ride this weekend. We went straight up Leslie Street, up to Finch, straight up for 30 kilometers up through the north of the city. So I was riding along really the length of Leslie Street. And you know, Leslie Street is very wide. And as any good planner, just like when I see an empty parking lot, I don't see a parking lot, I see a building site. And when I see a big, wide street, I see the opportunity to transform that street into a place that can accommodate a whole variety of uses and users. So Leslie Street, and then we turned up Finch, and I was riding along Finch, and there's a tremendous amount of space throughout the majority of our city. And we can use that space to make places in our city where currently people do not feel safe cycling or do not feel safe walking. We can use that space to transform those environments to become places of choice, just like that choice that we see in the downtown core. Part of doing this is also about bringing in some of the density that's going to populate these places and give them some vibrancy at the ground level. And just to give you an example of the extent to which this is happening throughout the city right now, you can see all of those red dots on the map, and there's many of them, represent our mid-rise projects in the city of Toronto. Because we have so much growth happening in the core of the city, and because it tends to be quite dramatic, and because often the sites are more complicated, we talk about what's happening in the downtown a tremendous amount. But we have many mid-rise projects happening throughout the breadth of this city that are moving us towards this vision of bringing in the uses and the density that can be a catalyst for transforming our streets in places where they aren't currently places of choice to being places where people can in fact choose to move around in a whole variety of different ways. And this matters for really one simple reason. It's because our success in continuing to grow and thrive and our economic success as a city is entirely contingent on retaining the boomer echo generation and attracting this generation to our cities. And what do we know about this generation? Well, we know that this is a generation that already is populating our downtown. This is a generation that is choosing to walk more, to cycle more, and to use transit. And it's also a generation that is choosing not to own a car. As a result, it behooves us in the City of Toronto in our planning process to really think about how the entire city is going to transform to be a place where there's more choice and where there's more housing choice. This is entrenched in our official plan policy here in the City of Toronto, and it's entrenched as recognizing the importance of building out complete communities. Because creating a complete street isn't really enough. It's not enough if you're not also creating the community that in fact is going to give that street life and vibrancy. And we're in the process in doing this in some places in the city right now. We have large-scale redevelopment projects like Regent Park. We also have places in the core of the city where we're looking at public space in new ways. And we're also beginning to recognize that a very important part of complete communities is about providing access to nature and using nature in new ways, like Sherbourne Commons on the waterfront, which is also a water filtration area, using nature in new ways in the city to provide for long-term sustainability. Complete communities are really the underpinning of complete streets. And I'm not going to walk through this definition here of complete streets, but it's important for you to know that we've been in our official plan very strong in creating a complete community policy framework. And we have in fact been directing 84% of our growth exactly where we want it to go. So the structure in our official plan is working extremely well here in the City of Toronto. The challenge is that we haven't in fact had the complete streets policy to accompany that. So we are in the process of an official plan review right now. Phase 1 was feeling congested. The rest of the phases are also called feeling congested, but you might recognize the term feeling congested from Phase 1, where we talked about revenue tools and priority transit projects. Moving into Phase 2, which we're launching in June, we'll be talking about a citywide bike framework, a high-level bike framework. What are the big moves, the big gestures that we need for cycling in order for cycling to be successful in the City of Toronto? And really, the underpinning of that thinking is a recognition, just like when you plan transit, you plan the big gestures, and then you plan all the local pieces that connect into the system. This is about entrenching in our official plan the big moves with respect to cycling infrastructure. It's also about creating policy that can direct change as change takes place in the city around ensuring our streets over time are transforming to constantly be providing more and more choice. And this is about a recognition that we want to add value in the way that we plan the city. It's about planning in a very different way. And this is about because that generation that I mentioned, that cohort, the boom echo cohort, they really expect their neighborhoods to look differently from how our neighborhoods have looked in the past. And you see here an image from Lawrence Allen, a redevelopment plan, and a recognition right through the plan that movement happens in very different ways, and that cycling and walking can be fundamental parts of our transportation planning system. But this is also about recognizing that the way we design our public realm is about inspiration and beauty, that we in fact ought to be aspirational when we think about our public realm. Really, Complete Streets is about planning streets in such a way that they are places that we can inhabit in a positive way, where we can have positive experiences, whether that's human interaction or whether we're moving in a way that we feel confident and safe, or whether it means we've designed our streets in such a way that we try something we've never tried before. People come up to me all the time and say, you know, I hear you on the cycling stuff, but I just don't feel safe. And if we can in fact design our streets so that we give people who want that option, I believe we will be creating a better city. We already know. The Pembia Institute undertook a study which they released last summer, where they surveyed people across the province of Ontario, and they asked a very simple question. Would you be willing to trade off a large home on a large lot for a smaller home on a smaller lot that is within walking distance of amenities and within walking distance of transit? And 86% responded and said yes. This in many ways puts the onus on us as planners to think very carefully about the policy frameworks that we're advocating and the kinds of places that we're planning to ensuring that they're responding to a much more sustainable future. The last closing comment that I'd like to make is that really, when we talk about complete streets, when we talk about complete communities, we're actually talking about creating real places. We're taking all of those things that we've really spent a couple of decades separating apart, live here, move here in this one way, work here. What we're really talking about when we're talking about placemaking or complete communities, we're really talking about bringing all those things back together again, overlaying them in all of their complexity, because we recognize that that complexity adds a tremendous amount of value. Thank you very much.